Hello, today I want to review a new Ben Shapiro's video that's called Is Fascism Right Wing? Okay, so let's get educated.
Fascist who wants to end this democracy.
Everybody knows what fascism means, right? After all, our politicians and media members, they use the word constantly. Everybody you don't like is a fascist. Everybody you do like is fighting fascism. But what exactly is fascism? The one thing everybody seems to know is that fascism is like Hitler, and this means the chief characteristic of fascism is the Holocaust. Therefore, by the transitive property, everyone you don't like is fascist, every fascist is Hitler, the most Hitler thing is the Holocaust. So, Donald Trump, or Ron DeSantis, or whomever the media say that day is probably going to commit a Holocaust. Invariably, the people in the media who use the word fascism use it to refer to a politician of the right. But it turns out that fascism is right-wing only when compared with outright communism. Fascism in Europe was a reactionary force. By American standards, fascism, which calls for unity of central authority and governmental control over private industry, among other agenda items, was far more left-wing than right-wing, which is why so many members of the American left were originally quite warm toward Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler.
Okay, so let me just point out a few flaws, a few very big flaws with this kind of reasoning. First of all, Ben Shapiro is ignoring the fact that there is leftist authoritarianism, like Stalin, the Soviets, Mao Zedong, and the right-wing authoritarianism. So, from his point of view, he's viewing it purely through the lens of the economy and state intervention in the economy. So, from his lens, all authoritarian regimes are leftists because they intervene in the economy. So, the Ayatollah of Iran is a leftist. Putin is a leftist. Then, according to him, Mao Zedong is a leftist. Okay, I would agree that Mao Zedong is a leftist, but to him, all strong authoritarian states are leftist, and that's just not how we use the term. That's not how an average person nor how historians use the term. Not to mention that Hitler called himself right-wing. Not to mention that Hitler had an entire passage in Mein Kampf, and yes, I actually did read Mein Kampf, about how he hates the Marxists. He uses the term the Marxists. He also speaks about how he hates the left and the Jews, of course, but Ben Shapiro is ignoring that you can be culturally on the right and still support some form of wealth redistribution. And in fact, many people in Europe that are on the right do support wealth redistribution, but they'll also support racism or discrimination of certain racial groups. It is only in America that ultra far-right fascist attitudes got combined with this idea that that states should not intervene in the economy, which is kind of absurd when you look at it. And the only fascist dictator that actually combined free markets and giving more freedom and less government intervention in the economy. So the only dictator that actually combined this laissez-faire capitalist system with fascism is Pinochet. And Pinochet was at the same time killing all social democrats and communists in his country and introducing liberal market reforms that actually reduced government intervention in the economy. But generally, yeah, fascists will support a higher dose of government intervention, but that's not something that only leftist regimes do. In fact, all regimes that plan on doing a war, or whether defensive or offensive, will require a higher dose of government intervention. But okay, let's go.
To understand this, let's look briefly at the history of fascism. Fascism is a very messy concept in that it crosses streams with a wide variety of other ideologies, ranging from Marxism to religious integralism. So what are the common features of fascism? First, fascism is characterized by a belief in the moral imperative of the centralized state. We can sense the roots of fascism going all the way back to Plato, who called for a philosopher king in a utopian state, although there are those who read Plato as satiric in this call. We can sense fascist themes in Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712 to 1778, who called for the dictatorship of the general will, a sort of miasmatic power emanating from the people but vested in a centralized authority in which all people would feel themselves members. This is why Robespierre, the author of The Reign of Terror, cited Rousseau as divine. George Frederick Hegel, 1770 through 1831, saw the power of the state as the apotheosis of mankind. Quote, the state consists in the march of God in the world. This means that fascism sees both economic and individual freedoms as antithetical to the good when they challenge the power of the state. Second, fascism is characterized by a belief in nationalism, or in its most virulent form, racial hierarchy. We can see the roots of fascism in ancient Sparta, a militaristic dictatorship rooted in racial purity. With the death of biblical adherence to the notion of a universal humanity during the Enlightenment, racial division became a deep part of Western thought. Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, spoke about a hierarchy of races in his earlier work. He attempted to walk some of that back later in life. This sort of thought was exacerbated by Charles Darwin's theory, which was misread to embrace scientific racism. Such scientific racism became a dominant philosophy throughout much of the progressive world, which is why both Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson were advocates of eugenics. Third, fascism is militaristic.
Okay, let me just say something. Yes, fascism does embrace nationalism, and the nation, for example, for Mussolini was the highest value, preserving the nation, and for Hitler it was preserving the German race. And that's where we can see a crucial difference between a leftist perspective and between the fascists. So a leftist would say class identity is more important and stronger than national identity. After all, Marx did say workers of the world unite, while a fascist would say no, we shouldn't unite with those folks on the other side of the border. They are not our nation. We do not share the same blood with them. Therefore, they are our enemies. And what's to me fascinating is that Ben Shapiro acknowledges this difference. He just said it. Fascists are nationalists. And I hope he understands that Marxists and leftists generally aren't. So I hope he'll emphasize this difference somewhere in this video, but maybe not. I don't know. Let's continue.
It sees organization around military lines as a model for human existence, and recommend action in the world as a response to existential nihilism. There's a reason Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, was beloved of fascists. He spoke of the Übermensch, who would be able to conquer through power of sheer will. Fascism suggests a sort of mystical spirit residing in the nation that must be fed through expansionism and militarization of life. Historically, the most important fascist was actually not Hitler, but Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was the first politician to truly channel the roiling forces of fascism into one movement. The word fascism comes from the word fascis, a bundle of rods grouped together to form a Roman weapon. Fascism comes from Italy. Mussolini was originally attracted to the work of Marx, which was not anti-fascist in any real way. Many of the predicates of fascism also worked quite well for Lenin and Stalin, but Mussolini eventually came to realize rejecting Marx could serve his own ends. In the aftermath of World War I, Mussolini gained power by marching on Rome with the acquiescence of the king in order to supposedly save the state from Bolshevism. Mussolini's philosophy was somewhat vague, but it carried all the central tenets of fascism. In 1927, Mussolini laid out the, quote, doctrine of fascism. He wrote, anti-individualistic, the fascist conception of life stresses the importance of the state and accepts the individual only insofar as his interests coincide with those of the state. Mussolini wrote that fascism was a, quote, spiritual attitude. That spiritual attitude required outward expansion, quote, the state is not only authority which governs and confers a legal form and spiritual value on individual wills, it is also power which makes its will felt and respected beyond its own frontiers, thus affording practical proof of the universal character of the decisions necessary to ensure its development. This implies organization and expansion, potential if not actual. That expansion meant not just militarization, but gargantuan public works, massive expansion of the welfare state, corporatization of the private sector, with the government leaving private industry intact but essentially working hand in glove with it to control it and channel its resources in the direction sought by the fascists. Private companies remaining in private hands, that's the reason that we're able to create innovative products that are recognized and used the world over right here in America. We know how incompetent the government is. Imagine them actually controlling all private business. Things would look pretty bleak. That's why here at the Daily Wire, we choose to partner with great companies that are free to
Okay, I didn't expect Ben Shapiro to introduce his sponsors, but okay, do Mussolini, Hitler, and let's say Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do they both want state to come in and to organize big work projects that will revive the economy? Well, yes, but is there anything wrong with that? Well, no. It only becomes morally wrong when you use that state intervention in order to create weapons and start a war. So yeah, I really don't have anything else to say other than I mean, state intervention is a method. It is just a tool, and there isn't anything wrong with state intervention. After all states have to intervene to an extent, otherwise they wouldn't exist. So yeah, but
He quickly gained worldwide credence and approval. Fascism spread throughout Europe. Hitler greatly admired Mussolini, of course, and Hitler's original beer hall putsch was supposed to mimic the success of Mussolini's march on Rome. Hitlerian fascism was significantly more totalitarian than Mussolini's brand. The cult of the great leader reached its fruition in the Führer. Philosopher Martin Heidegger embodied the feelings of millions in 1933, quote, "The Führer himself and he alone is the German reality, present and future, and its law, Heil Hitler." Nazism, of course, took on racial eugenics in a far more significant way, culminating in the Holocaust. And Nazism's militarism ended in the catastrophe of World War II. Hitler was not the only fascist to follow Mussolini's lead. Fascist regimes took over in a variety of countries, ranging from Hungary and Romania to Paraguay and eventually Iraq. Other states, ranging from Spain to Argentina, mimicked many aspects of fascism, leading many to label them quasi-fascist. Certain aspects of fascism, particularly in the economic realm, could even be seen under FDR in the United States. FDR's New Deal, complete with government resources directed at forcing economic conformity, controlled huge swaths of American life, with FDR aide Harry Hopkins openly suggesting, quote, "We are not afraid of exploring anything within the law, and we have a lawyer who will declare anything you want to do to be legal." And this is why the term fascism is so attractive in political discourse. Everybody thinks of brown shirts and small mustaches when they invoke fascism, but there are a lot of aspects of fascism that survive in a variety of forms. Corporatism, government working hand in glove with industry, is a form of economic fascism. Racial hierarchies can be indicative of fascist thinking, particularly when combined with differential treatment under law. Militarism can be termed fascist, particularly when its resources are directed at domestic populations. Few people will admit to being fascist today. It would be far more useful for everybody to simply critique policies with reference to history, but without reference to the buzzword that poisons everyday discourse. We can have good and interesting conversations about the value of corporatism, for example, without invoking Hitler. We can talk about opposing the shortcomings of atomistic individualism without invoking the Holocaust. The truth is that nowadays the term fascism tends to be a slur rather than a predicate to a useful conversation. As it turns out, everybody you don't like probably isn't Hitler.
So yeah, I would agree that not everybody is Hitler, but what Ben Shapiro also acknowledges is that fascism isn't just Hitler. In fact, Hitler is called by some historians, for example Nolte, an extreme fascist. Some even go as far as to say that he actually isn't a fascist at all, because National Socialism is something so extreme and so weird that some say it isn't even fascism. But okay, let me just say, if I had to compare Trump to a fascist dictator, I would compare him to Mussolini, not to Hitler. And for a simple reason, I mean, of course, there are many reasons. He didn't start World War II, he didn't commit the Holocaust and stuff like that, but what's interesting is that Umberto Eco actually makes the case after he defines fascism, and he then proceeds to talk about Mussolini. And Umberto Eco says, Mussolini, if you look at his life, he actually doesn't believe in anything other than power for himself. That's why Mussolini, in the early stage of his life, was very anti-church, even perhaps anti-religion, but then later he restored the Vatican and claimed to be pro-church and claimed to be doing what the Christian God intended. And in many other aspects, Ben Shapiro also acknowledges this. In his youth, Mussolini almost seemed to be a leftist, while later, when he realized that the path towards power lies in becoming a right-winger, he moved to the right politically. And yeah, that actually reminds me more of Trump, because Trump doesn't actually have a clear ideology in a way in which Hitler had. Hitler, from the very beginning, he talked about how much he hated the Jews, about Lebensraum, about conquering the East, and then he did it. He actually was a very consistent person that never changed his values, at least after, I'm talking about post-World War I Hitler that we all know and talk about. Well, Mussolini, he changed his political views quite radically, and he even actually in the early 1930s he even hated Hitler and called him an idiot. But then later, when his military was proven to be too inefficient to conquer Greece, he started to rely on the Germans winning the war on his behalf, and that's why later Hitler was his main ally. That was even just keeping the Italian war machine in the game. But okay, that's all for this video, and see you in the next one.